Hello, and welcome to my Modlist showcase, where I give an overview and opinion on mod lists to help find the right one for you. This time we are looking at Elysium by Titansbane, released for Skyrim Special Edition. The version I've been playing on is version 4.9.6, released on the 31st of July 2021, although the author is now into the 5.0 version, which you'll be seeing in the background. You can check on the Elysium Discord linked below for any changes and updates. Firstly, what is Elysium? The description reads, Elysium is a visually focused list that is fully featured with hundreds of new additions and optional Creation Club support, extending the base setup with Enai Seon's full suite of gameplay overhauls, as well as various new quests and encounters. Elysium is available to download from the Wabberjack Modlist installer. While I won't cover the specifics of the installation in this video, the installation was incredibly easy, with clear instructions provided. This mod list is one of the largest of all Skyrim mod lists on Wabberjack. Because of this, the download did take me a long while, with mods and Skyrim install totaling to around 180GB. Although I don't have a very good internet myself, so it's just one of those things that will vary from person to person. Once in game, all the mod manager configurations are already set, so unlike many mod lists, you can just start up a new character and play straight away. Now for what the mod list adds. For this showcase I'll be showing clips taken throughout my current playthrough. I've spent plenty of time with this list, so I have a good grasp on what it's like to play. Usually I'll combine graphics and performance into one category, but with this list there's just plenty to talk about with both. Almost every aspect of the game now has mods that make it look better. Everything looks much higher resolution, but still keeps with the feeling of Skyrim's Nordic setting. Textures look much better, but also doesn't make everything clean and perfect looking like some texture mods, which I appreciate. There's also a number of mods which affect the weather. The key one is Cathedral Weathers, which creates a perfect blend of natural looking weather with a touch of vibrancy to fit the fantasy setting. The lighting matches perfectly as well, with interiors now feeling a bit dimmer, which makes sense when being lit by candlelight. And caves are now very dark, which is more of a personal preference thing. I'd usually think it's too dark. However, your character now has a wearable lantern, so you can light up the way without needing to hold the torch all the time. So with that, I think the dark caves are very effective. Rudy EMB and Reshade is also included with the list, which look great, though it does depend if you like the vibrancy of the colours, as the default list is quite vibrant. All this, plus a huge number of foliage mods, really makes the game stunning to look at, and really keeps to the idea of every frame a painting. So looking at these graphics, it should come as no surprise that this takes a lot of power to run. The author states that at least 6GB of VRAM is required, and no matter what, it's going to test your PC. However, overall I would still consider the performance to be surprisingly good. Firstly, I would highly recommend you follow this Elysium performance guide after your installation. It gained me around 20 FPS in some areas with minimal loss to the graphics. I'll have it linked in the description below. After that guide, I was able to hold between 50 and 60 FPS in the majority of areas, which for a list that looks this good is incredibly impressive. Now obviously there are areas where this dips, but what I see as most important is the fact the FPS stays steady. So yes, you may get 40 FPS in some areas, but it doesn't fluctuate wildly, meaning it doesn't look that bad when you're moving. My specs are here on screen, and while I know it's very high end and might not be useful for a lot of people, I was running at 1440p ultra-wide, so I would expect the same performance I'm getting on say a GTX 1080 at 1080p. Going into this list, I was expecting it to be almost entirely graphics focused, but surprisingly, there is still a huge amount of gameplay mods added, making this list very fun for a playthrough, rather than just a list designed for screenshots. It does still feel like Skyrim, but more refined. Crafting and enchanting has tweaks to make them more interesting, there's new spells and adjustments to magic to provide more options, and new changes to the perks makes leveling more exciting. The perk mod used is Valkyrie, minimalistic perks of Skyrim, and I think it sums up the gameplay tweaks well. There's no huge game-changing adjustments to Skyrim's mechanics, just subtle enhancements to make them more interesting. Open world loot makes it so the loot you find is mostly tied to your progression, so you're unlikely to find really powerful gear early on, unless you take on a difficult dungeon. And finally, you now only gain experience from completing quests and killing monsters, giving a slower but more rewarding pace to the game. It is worth noting that this list doesn't include any survival mods, but I'll talk about that later in the add-ons section. tons of combat mods have been added, definitely moving away from the simplistic combat of the base game. The most impactful mod is Wildcat, Combat of Skyrim. It's worth checking out the mod page for everything it changes, but I'll just go over some key points. Enemy AI has been improved, where now if a group of enemies outnumber you, they'll likely fight more aggressive. You plus all NPCs now use a lot more stamina when fighting, and when stamina is fully depleted, movement speed is decreased. You are rewarded for blocking and striking just at the right times, with bonuses like double damage. And my favourite aspect is now you and all enemies deal more damage to each other. This makes combat very deadly but rewarding, where if you blindly attack, you'll be struck down quick, but if you time your attacks just right, you'll be winning fights within a few hits. There's a couple other notable mods, like Deadly Dragons, which turns dragons into the deadly threat they should be, and Smart NPC Potions, which lets NPCs use their own potions and poisons against you. And finally, the combat in third person feels much more natural than in vanilla Skyrim. I admittedly didn't play much in third person, but for what I tried, it really did feel more responsive, and a more viable way to play than normal. Almost every city and town has been added upon, making them much more dense, and recapturing that feeling of stumbling upon them for the first time. For the most part, they don't feel completely unrecognisable, but instead they just give you more to explore, and make them feel like actual places a lot of people could live. While Elysium hasn't gone overboard on quest mods, some of the largest and most popular are still included. Mods like Worm's Tooth and the Forgotten City add DLC-sized quests and lands, which fit perfectly into the game and provide hours of new content. On top of all this, a number of the vanilla quests have been improved to provide more roleplay options, and make you feel like you're actually making an impact in the world. Elysium comes with a bunch of new music for ambience in combat. From the tracks I've heard, they all seem to fit Skyrim's theme well, though of course music is always a personal preference, as I myself am always happy with Skyrim's original soundtrack on its own. Loads of the audio has been improved to make the game much more atmospheric, with large audio mod bundles that really make the environments come alive. I think this is a category you best hear for yourself. This list adds a bunch of new weapons integrated into the level list, and many of their own animations. Weapons like whips, rapiers, quarterstaffs and more all fit naturally into the game world, all feeling lore-friendly. Also hundreds of new high-quality armors and clothing have been added as well, again all fitting right into Skyrim's style, and making loot a lot more interesting. The first thing I wanted to talk about here is the movement, as sprinting and general character movement has been changed to add a lot more weight to it. This took me a long time to get used to, as moving around feels a lot less smooth now, but a lot of people seem to enjoy the movement, so do give it a chance if you find it jarring like me. Also numerous new followers have been added around the world, including the award-winning Inigo. Hundreds of new spells have been added with the Apocalypse and Mage archetypes mods, making mage builds ever-changing. And finally, no survival-based mods like hunger and weather effects are included. Now for some additions to the list that you can make, but first I must stress, any changes you make to the list has nothing to do with the Modlist author. You should only do so if you have an understanding of modding and accept that any consequences are yours to deal with. If you like survival mods like me, I'd look into using Frostbite, which is rather simple but gives all the basics you'd want in a survival weather mod. And for food and hunger mods, I'd recommend trying Vitality mode, which again is rather basic, but it gives all the hunger properties you could want. Though I've not used either, so I can't say they work for sure, but they're usually a safe bet for lightweight survival mods. Other than that, there's not really anything I added, although it is worth noting that you can change the default EMB to one of your choosing if you wish. I was pleasantly surprised by this list. I went in expecting it to be a nice list to look at, but not much else. However, almost every aspect of the game has been tweaked and improved. Many lists heavily focus on a single feature, like new quests, survival, Dark Soulsy combat, and so on, whereas Elysium does a bit of everything. That might make it sound like it's a mess of mods, but it's really not. It takes me back to when I first got into Skyrim modding, and I'd scroll through Nexus clicking download on whatever mods looked good and caught my eye, without having any focus in mind. Sometimes you want more mods than say the Vanilla plus Phoenix flavour mod list, but also you don't want one specific feature that all the mods focus on. And so Elysium has a perfect balance of a heavily modded Skyrim, but one that keeps with the original feeling and gameplay of the vanilla game. Now, because there's so many mods on this list, there might be at least one new or changed feature that you're not a fan of, but honestly, with how much content this adds and gets right, you'll find it really doesn't matter. So if you want to get into a heavily modded playthrough, but also want to keep the core gameplay and feeling of Skyrim, then Elysium is the list for you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, as it helps the channel grow. Also, I have a Twitch where I tend to play some relaxing games, and a Discord if you want to talk about mod stuff or anything else, so see that in the description. And on top of that, thank you to my Patreon supporters, Michael Eric, Nicholas J and Christian Howell. You're really helping me out here. Thank you and farewell.